Over the past several weeks, I've been focusing a lot on how the election went wrong for Donald Trump and the lawsuits that followed that have continually been dismissed or ignored by the courts. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to focus instead on where Republicans made a pretty important victory that should last for the next several years to even a decade, and may really change the landscape starting in 2022 and moving into 2024. Let's talk a little bit about gerrymandering. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Law-Splaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And today, we're going to talk about a concept that some people call gerrymandering and others call creative redistricting, depending on which side of the aisle you're on when it benefits you. That's the entire question. It's not what the overall principle of either party perspective is on the issue. It's whether you want it to be a good thing or a bad thing when the other guy is doing it, right? Like, that's the trick here. And in this case, for Republicans, gerrymandering is not really the word they want. It's just simply redistricting, and they will be doing, presumably, some very favorable redistricting going into 2022. And as this Guardian article illustrates, which, by the way, is linked down in the description below, and if you want an intense state-by-state breakdown from the big wins for Republicans, you can read the rest of this article. It is from the Guardian, so keep that bias and perspective in mind as you read it, but the information is very interesting and informative, and in a lot of ways is correct. And that is that Republican, let's read the headline. As Biden won the presidency, Republicans cemented their grip on power for the next decade. Now, why is that? That is because following the census, which is every 10 years, and then on the 11th year is the year following the census. So last time, obviously 2011. Now we've got 2021 looming. The state congresses get together and redraw their districts for the federal and sometimes state congressional elections. That means that they have an opportunity to draw districts that are more favorable to cementing their own power or cementing party control of particular states. One of the big states, and probably the most important states involved in this, was Texas. There's a lot of talk about Texas going blue. Texas has lots of new people coming in and all of that stuff. And Democrats actually picked up a bunch of seats in Texas back in 2018. However, they did not win. They had a net even showing here in 2020. They needed to flip 9 seats to have a chance at controlling the redistricting of Texas, and they did not flip. Well, they flipped 1, but they lost 1, so it was a net even on them, which means the Republican House and Republican Senate in Texas will be in charge of redrawing the districts. And, for example, Texas has had so much population growth that it's expected to pick up 4 more congressional seats in the new districting. That's big. That's 4 more electoral votes. That's 4 more representatives in Congress starting in 2022, and that will have a major impact on how future elections go. And if Republicans are able to, and with a Republican legislature, a Republican Senate, with a Republican governor, they're going to be able to go ahead and draw these maps in a way that is very favorable to Republicans, straight up adding 4 more Republican congressmen to Congress in 2022. So this, we saw this actually happen back in 2012, but there were, it's interesting to note that Republicans aren't as well situated in 2020 as they were in 2010. However, there was a Supreme Court ruling in 2013 that in some ways does make Republicans potentially more situated or better situated in many of the southern states than they have been in the past. So we'll get to talking about that as we go through the article. But this is a really, really big deal. And it's one of the reasons to consider the possibility that maybe not all hope is lost for Republicans who are just focused on the Donald Trump versus Joe Biden presidential election. Remember that legal change starts in Congress and especially at the state levels, where many of these state legislatures are the ones who are supposed to be writing election laws. So this is a little bit of the hope pill many people have been looking for, though not in regards to the presidency. And all of those sort of opinions about the presidential election are going to stay out of this video, although I'm certainly sympathetic to how people feel about it, in both camps, right? Like, some people just want that election to be over and the drama and lawsuits around it to be done, and other people are really still angry over the inconsistencies and the questions surrounding that election. Both of those positions have a lot of merit to them, and I understand the desires of both sort of camps. But we're not talking about the presidential election here. This is entirely about congressional elections and how devastating this looks to be for Democrats over the next decade, because this will likely result in severe swings towards the Republican side of the bench going into 2022, which may involve a flip of the House and possibly gains back in the Senate. It all depends on, a bunch of factors, but this will certainly favor Republicans in that sort of quest. Okay, so they have, while the world focused on the election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in November, some of the most consequential contests were in state legislative races between candidates many have never heard of. State lawmakers have the authority to redraw electoral districts in most U.S. states every 10 years. In 2010, Republicans undertook an unprecedented effort called Project Red Map to win control of state legislatures across the country and drew congressional and state legislative districts that gave them a significant advantage for the next decade. In 2020, Democrats sought to avoid a repeat of 2010 and poured millions of dollars and other resources into winning key races. It didn't go well. Democrats failed to flip any of the legislative chambers they targeted, and Republicans came out of election night in nearly the best possible position for drawing districts, according to an analysis by 538, and will have the opportunity to draw 188 congressional seats, 43% of the House of Representatives. Democrats will have a chance to draw at most just 73 seats. Republicans will probably also be able to draw districts that will make it more difficult for Democrats to hold their majority in the U.S. House in 2022. Quote, "It was really bad. It was devastating to the project of building long-term power," said Amanda Littman, the co-founder and executive director of Run for Something, a group focused on local races. So here's who controls redistricting in the 2020 election this is by state delegation, or, not, or by just state individually, not by number of votes or anything like that. But we do have, a strong Republican control in many of these places. And some of them, of course, are very big and important states. Texas, Florida, Ohio, Indiana. These are North Carolina, Georgia. Maybe they can go ahead and fix some of their issues. Anyway, we do have some pretty big states with lots of legislative control coming out of them in favor of Republicans. And they have the strong reds are Republican legislatures that have no competing check. The softer colors are Republican legislature but a Democratic governor. And then the softer blue is Democratic legislature but a Republican governor who could presumably veto. Not all of these governors have the ability to veto redistricting For example, North Carolina, I believe the governor does not have veto power over redistricting, so it doesn't matter. Minnesota is a little bit of a weird camp because it has a split legislature, because we have a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. But yeah, overall, this is a much stronger sort of map for Republicans than Democrats after the 2020 election. So there isn't a single explanation for why Democrats performed so poorly in down-ballot races. The decision not to canvass in person may have had a more severe impact on local races. Democratic candidates were also trying to win in districts that Republicans had already gerrymandered to their own advantage. The loss in down-ballot races was a loss by 1,000 paper cuts, Littman said. So then we've got Democrats saying how, oh no, it's going to be better than 2010, which is great. But here is the important part. Republicans have 2 additional advantages this year. In 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court said that federal courts could not strike down districts on the grounds that they were too partisan. This was a challenge that happened to redistricting. And they said, look, they're just drawing this favorably to their own party. And the Supreme Court said, yep, political. Sorry. That's the way our Republican system of government works. We have a representative republic, not a direct democracy. And so once you win at certain Republican stages or Republican areas of the government, and I don't mean big R Republican Party, I mean small r Republican principle, then you get the opportunity to do things that represent groups of people, including redistricting. Now, another part of this is our federalist system, which grants the power to draw federal districts to state legislatures. And of course, that is in line with what the founders intended when they set up the federal system, right? The state legislatures control the manner in which elections take place, not only for president, but also for their federal representatives. They're the ones in charge of drawing districts because the Constitution says so. And so then the state legislatures make up the rules for how they do that, and then go ahead and follow those rules when they do the drawing, and then presumably when they do the vote. Although we've learned this year that maybe not all rules need to be followed on votes, but that's a different discussion and we're staying away from it. Okay, the other part was 2021 will also be the first time that places with a history of voting discrimination will also be able to draw districts without first submitting them to the Justice Department for approval because of a 2013 Supreme Court decision, Shelby County versus Holder, that struck down a pre-clearance provision at the heart of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Okay, so let's talk about this real quick. Places with a history of voting discrimination literally just meant Republican states in the South, according to Democrats. That's all it was. So states that in the past did have severe issues with voting restrictions were continually labeled to be racist going into the future, and are presumably only doing racist things in their states because that is frankly how a certain segment of the country perceives Republican states in the South, is that they literally believe that they're still in 1860 and that they want slavery to be great again or whatever. Obviously, this is not a true sort of interpretation of how states operate, but it is a very expedient and efficient political narrative that frankly the left has been running on, I don't know, for 40 or 50 years now. But in 2013, this was challenged in the Supreme Court, the idea of pre-clearance, and that was where the states with a history of voting discrimination are presumed, like this is how prejudicial this was, that their actions were presumed to be rooted in racism in regards to voting districts because of things that many people who are in the legislature are being accused of. They weren't even born when they were happening, but that's how it goes. The states had a history of voter suppression, and in 1965, again, we're talking about 55 years ago, they passed the Voting Rights Act, and that act said that you needed to have pre-clearance from the Justice Department. Now, when these things were drawn last, the Justice Department was Eric Holder under Barack Obama in 2011. When this was challenged in 2013, they went ahead and won, but the effects of that won't have been seen until this new drawing of districts, 8 years later, when we will now see how that impacts. The states will no longer have to ask a Justice Department for permission to redraw their districts. The districts can still be challenged in court, but challenging valid legislative action tends to not go that well. And they have, as we saw in 2019, the idea that it was partisan was not something that was sufficient. So they will have to show legitimate sort of voter discriminatory acts to a court to go ahead and overturn some district in the South, something they haven't been very effective at doing. But of course, pre-clearance was at issue. So this is really big news. It's really good news for Republicans. I know this election has been overall very disappointing for Republicans because the focus has largely been on the presidential election. It is the big news item. It is the big ticket, most sort of prominent feature that most people notice. However, in those state elections, Republicans absolutely cleaned house and set up a system which gives them a lot of favor going into the next decade at the federal level, especially as the amount of representatives that exist change in each state based on population changes. Some states will lose representatives, other states will gain them, and then those new representatives will need to have new districts drawn, and the Republicans are seated to control most of those drawings. In fact, an overwhelming plurality of those drawings go to Republican Congresses. And this won't be undoable until 2031. So that's a big win. It is a hope pill going into 2022 and even potentially into 2024, because this will shift the electoral makeup. It'll shift the congressional makeup of different states a little bit, and we will see what happens. But that's what I wanted to cover today. It's this idea of gerrymandering and where Republicans really did well in this election cycle. Look, if you like stuff like this, and in general, not just for me, but for every creator, YouTube is doing new stuff to kind of mess with how creators' videos perform, how their live streams perform. Please like it. Please share it. Support the creators you like. Support the information you like to learn about and like to hear. Go ahead and help us out, and we will keep making content you guys like to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Peace. Peace.